Hiya, welcome to my Compound Life. I'm your host, Jonathan. This is a channel where we build assets, we build habits, and of course, we build freedom that should really be financial freedom, time freedom for you, me, and anyone else that watches my channel. At the time of recording, it's the 10th of January, around 1:43 p.m. This will be a Bitcoin daily video. Okay, so at the time of recording, Bitcoin price right now is around 90,718. It is trading around 90,500 to about 91,000. In the past 24 hours, it went up a small 0.3%, starting from about 91,500, hitting a high near 91,900. And of course, low around 89,700. We are, however, still 28% away from previous all-time high, around 126,000, unfortunately. But we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. I think one thing to also highlight, right? Until we can get back into this range, that's the 200 days moving average, right? At present, it's about 106,000 until we can get back and reclaim that. I strongly believe we are actually about to enter Bitcoin bear market. Actually, I can't say we are about, because at the current pacing of the price action for Bitcoin, it does seem we already started heading into a bear market sometime back in end of October last year. And so understand there are a lot of narratives out there that says Bitcoin, it's a prolonged cycle, elongated cycle, until we can, reclaim back. I think at present, there's a huge resistance level at around 94 to 95,000 until we can even reclaim 94 to 95,000, because every time when Bitcoin kind of tries to, get back to 94, 95,000, it gets rejected, right? So that's a huge barrier here. Until we can break through this, that means we're not going to go any higher to try to reclaim that 200 days moving average. And if we cannot reclaim 200 days moving average, essentially that means we're going to trend around 90 to 94,000, and then eventually we'll deep much further, right? And the whole reason for it to get back to 94 and make 94,000 or 95,000 USD per Bitcoin as not the resistance, but as the support. Essentially, with the support, we'll have a higher likelihood of getting back to the 200 days moving average. And then, of course, this yellow line is the 50 days moving average, will gradually go up too. And finally, did I press this? And finally, there will be some sort of a golden cross that gets formed, which will lead to more bullish sentiment, more bullish trends. So that's the situation that we need to take into consideration. Okay, so again, I think this time around, I'm just bringing you a few more charts to let you know the situation. Let's quickly look through the 4 years cycle from low to low. This is a Bitcoin chart. So again, cast your eyes on the white line, which essentially means this cycle. The blue line here, that was the third cycle. And the yellow line here, that's the second Bitcoin cycle, right? So obviously there's no first cycle, because the data, I think, will skew up the whole thing. See, you kind of skew up the whole thing, but let's ignore the first cycle for now. Let's purely just look at the recent fourth, third, and second cycle. This gray out area, essentially, these mark the all-time high of Bitcoin for the recent cycle, the third cycle, as well as the second cycle, right? It's a bit like clockwork. So from the bottom that it gets to, right? I think in the approximately that how many 1,000 days, and then it gets to the top, and then afterwards, it usually takes approximately 1 year for Bitcoin to reach the bottom. And in a way, this isn't as bearish as what we all think, right? We obviously hit the top sometime in October when Bitcoin was at around 126,000. And then now we are gradually trending lower, very similar to all other, other cycle, right? And then hopefully by sometime in October, that should really be the bottom for Bitcoin in 2026, which is this year, right? So let me know in the comment section, what do you think? Of course, I'm not here to spread FUD. I'm not here to be bearish, but I'm just here to help us all prepare to the fact that maybe 4-year cycle remain. Maybe there could still be another run for Bitcoin. But if there's no more run for Bitcoin, then we need to be prepared. And this is why earlier today I've made a video to remind all of you guys to, this would be the time to stack cash, because what you want to do is to, re-enter somewhere here when Bitcoin is at its bottom, so that by buying at the bottom, you get more upside. You can earn more gains, right? So that's why the whole explanation. So we are already, let's say, less than 4 months. If we purely just follow the 4-year cycle, Bitcoin 4-year cycle. So in a way, I think it's good. It hasn't been too painful so far. Bitcoin hasn't dropped tremendously. But I also am prepared with the fact that Bitcoin could potentially drop even further to 70,000 to 55,000 or even to 30,000 bucks, right? So that would be kind of like another accumulation of our lifetime, right? Because look at it this way, if this is like your first time entering Bitcoin is at a price of 91,000, it is in a way pretty expensive for you to even acquire a Bitcoin. But of course, you don't have to acquire the whole full Bitcoin. You can just buy small amount of sats, right? But having said that, the fact that if we look through the rhythm, right? I always talk about the rhythm for Bitcoin. There will always be rhythm and cycle for everything for the equity markets. Even for, if you're into buying properties, real estates, right? There will always be some sort of rhythm. But somehow the Bitcoin rhythm, it's a lot more easier to understand and to get your heads around, right? So looking at this, essentially what you see is, this area marks the all-time high for Bitcoin. Now it will take about 1 year for us to get to the bottom. And that bottom should really be sometime in October or November this year. Okay, so we are in the 10th of January right now. And then you have essentially a few more solid months, right? Just take my words. Of course, you have to do your own research. It's a non-financial advice, but take my words. This could be your final few months worth of accumulation, right? If you want to get into Bitcoin, because you don't want to again keep buying Bitcoin at the top, right? Like buy at this top and then not pound cost average or dollar cost average to bring down your average and then have to wait another 4 years. That means your gain essentially would be limited, right? So when exactly will be the next Bitcoin halving event, right? That will be around 2 years and 77 days, right? So once Bitcoin, let's go back to this graph. Once Bitcoin, right? This is where we are now. This is where Bitcoin top. And then we are going lower. We are trending lower. And then this highlighted area marks the Bitcoin bottom. Okay, so as you can see, for the last cycle, this area marks the bottom. For the last cycle, the cycle before, this area marks the bottom, right? So this would be the time that you want to get in, right? But that means but it doesn't mean, if you miss this, it's all gonna be, doom and gloom, right? You can always DCA, but what I'm letting you know right now is you just simply accumulate as much cash, stack up cash or stablecoin USDT, USDC as much as possible, just so that you can, hardcore DCA in towards this area, right? Because Bitcoin halving event, the next halving event will be sometime in March 27th, in about 2 years time, just under 3 years time. Okay, 2 years, 77 days time, okay? Of course, there are a lot of data that shows different actual halving date, but I think it's all to do with the blocks, right? So, of course, for BitBo, it's saying that it would be 2 years, 77 days. But on CoinGecko, it's saying April the 11th versus March the 27th. So it's not too far off. Okay, so in the next halving, why is it called halving event? Why is it called halving date, right? Reiterate. In the next halving, right, that will be so in the recent halving, that's in 2024, April and 20th, right? Bitcoin did a very, very good bull market run that bring us to about 126,000, right? And essentially it's all because of supply shock, right? Because from the third halving event, Bitcoin, every block that the miners created, they get given rewards of approximately 12.5 Bitcoin. And the recent halving event, every block the miners will be rewarded 3.125 Bitcoin, right? So after the next halving event, that would take place sometime in April the 17th, they'll be rewarded of 1.56. So in a way, Bitcoin will get very, very scarce because essentially there will simply not be enough Bitcoin for everyone to purchase. And then we all know that this time around, the ETF are buying heavily. The institutions are also acquiring heavily versus us, the retail. Retail, we will definitely continue to buy, but our buying power will never be the same as institutions like Strategy, MetaPlanet. And of course, I think closer to each halving event, there will be more companies that are trying to get up on this hype, and then they will be announcing that they want to become a Bitcoin treasury holding companies too, right? And then also I think even for retail, the traditional retail investors, more and more of them will be onboarded onto Bitcoin soon, because Bank of America, they're announcing that they're suggesting, giving people playbook suggestion that they'll need to stack at least 4% of their wealth into Bitcoin, right? So there will be an immense amount of money that comes in, right? So with supported by the halving event, right, where 3.125 Bitcoin per block right now will get to about 1.5625 worth of Bitcoin per block, right? So very, very scarce. Okay, so you may ask, but why am I talking about the best time to buy will be, towards this here, right? Right. So this here, would be 12 months after the Bitcoin all-time high. It gets to here, right? That marks the bottom. But why am I talking about, every time the best time to enter Bitcoin will be 500 days before the halving event, right? So this is where this comes in. So this specific chart looks into, so this 0 here marks the Bitcoin halving event, right? So essentially these are 500 days before the halving, 500 days before the halving, and 500 days after the Bitcoin halving event. Okay, so so you can see the green one is the first halving event, of course, very, very steep. Whomever gets in the first Bitcoin halving, they earn heaps if they continue to to keep hold of their Bitcoin, of course. And of course the purple line indicates the second, the third one, the blue one, and let's take out the first one. Okay, maybe it's not as clear if you take out the first one. So you can definitely see the 500 days definitely marks the bottom. Okay, so for the second halving event, you will have these many days to accumulate Bitcoin and then eventually sell it. So the saying will always be 500 days before Bitcoin halving event, you accumulate. I mean, for me, I'm going to accumulate for about 100 days, like 500 to about 400. So this would be my accumulation zone, right? So the same applies for the recent fourth halving event. The same applies for third, right? So this would be my accumulation zone. And this is why, a lot of my video, I always talk about 10,000 pound, 10,000 USD. If this is how much you're willing to test or dip your toes into Bitcoin, let's start with that. And pound cost average or DCA in, because Bitcoin being such a volatile beast, just dumping in 10,000 pound, you might not be buying its lowest, right? But knowing that this marks the bottom and this is the upward potential, you probably wouldn't mind just dumping something at a high here, right? And then wait to cash out here, right? So this is why I'm showing you 500 days before halving event will usually be a good time to accumulate. But what I'm doing here, which I found to be quite beneficial, especially this cycle, I actually just DCA in for about 100 days. That's essentially this point, right? And of course, after the halving event, 500 days usually will lead it to, to mark the top for Bitcoin, right? Whether we'll have another top based on this, I don't know, right? But if we simply follow these trends, follow this rhythm, I'm not saying that it has to be 500 days or 200 days or whatever, right? But it gives us a level of clarity about timing and rhythm, right? So we know that after the halving event, Bitcoin will be the number of Bitcoin that gets generated will be about 1.5625, which is very, very scarce. If we have ETF, we have BlackRock, we have Fidelity, MicroStrategy, and everyone, institutions keeps on buying. It's going to be so scarce that this specific asset will be insufficient to supply for all of these big companies and even us, right? So this is why after the halving event, there will be a supply shock so big, the price movement will go up. And this will be like the time that you need to start to think about it's now time to come out, because what it says is by the time Bitcoin reach its peak, right? And then it would gradually drop back off, right? So this is where, how I always explain, you have a hodl back versus a swing back. So the swing back, essentially, you kind of follow through this rhythm where you want to buy the low around here and then sell high around here and keep on repeat the process over and over again. Buy the low around here, wait for halving, and then sell the high, right? So essentially, guys, I mean, we've only got few more days left. I mean, at least for the accumulation window will be sometime in November this year. Well, at least that will be my accumulation window. I'll let you guys know if I kind of sense things differently, because there could be a special scenario where this time around it could be an elongated Bitcoin rally, right? So we'll have to see. But for the time being, I'm kind of following this rhythm, and of course, I think the best time to enter, if we kind of estimate that the next halving event would be sometime in April the 11th, essentially that means the 500 days will be sometime in 28th of November 2026, which is this year, which is in a few months time, right? So we're not far from the next Bitcoin accumulation window, right? So this 500 days before the next halving event, right, will be essentially this 500 days. And I just need to make sure all of you guys have paid this attention, that the best time to accumulate probably will be this 100 days. This is where you'll be buying Bitcoin at its cheap, right? So set your timing. Let's say if you've got $10,000, right? $5,000 just to do daily DCA, right? Just to cover this, right? And then you set it. If Bitcoin goes up, you buy. If Bitcoin goes down, you buy, right? That will be your $5,000 daily divided by 100 days. You buy them, and then the other one, maybe $10,000. So $5,000 for DCA. The other $5,000, you might want to do heavy DCA. Where you kind of see Bitcoin drops a lot. You want to go in heavily, right? So this will help you to cover more DCA, the other $5,000. And of course, if you somehow have missed some of this, you still have time, another few more 100 days to continue with your DCA, right? So whenever you gotten your paycheck, you pay for everything else, you save some money, you continue to DCA, right? Because you enter the low, right? That means your average will somehow remain low too, right? It all depends on how much you put in at the low too, right? So this is why, if you gone in heavy at the beginning, and if there are more upside, you would definitely gain more. Okay, so that's what I want to tell you guys all about. And then of course, let's get into fear and greed index. What the hell is happening with Bitcoin right now? Okay, fear and greed index. Currently, we are at 26. I think we were also quite fearful yesterday. 26. The 9th, we're also 26. So nothing changed versus yesterday. But overall, the week, we are we are still more in fear versus in neutral. So I do hope things will change. We'll get into the news section to chat more about what are some of the likely news that can potentially flip this to a more neutral zone. Okay, ETF. Let's go into ETF now. Bitcoin ETF, yesterday it was bearish, $398 million worth of outflow. Not good. A lot of the outflow came from IBIT from BlackRock. Sorry, reading wrong. 250 million worth of outflow, not 398. So yesterday's data, 252 came from BlackRock, and some from Bitwise. Of course, I think overall for the full week worth of ETF, it was all very bearish of 681 million worth of outflow. Whereas last week we actually made some positive gain for inflow. And for Ethereum, I think the same, the 9s, 93 million worth of outflow for Ethereum, mainly from BlackRock. However, for Ethereum, I think on a weekly basis, it's still negative outflow of total 93 million versus last week it was at so total for Ethereum is about 68 million outflow, and versus last week was about 160 million worth of inflow. And then for Solana, Sol ETF, 9th of January, no data maybe. But anyway, if we're looking at weekly data for this week, I think Solana continued to do well with well over $1 billion worth of inflow. I think Solana is the only one that's doing well. Let me look at Solana price now. Solana is about $136. It's doing well enough. I think with current Solana pace, it can potentially, the positiveness of ETF, it can potentially go a lot more higher, potentially. Not financial advice. I do hold a bag of Solana, by the way. So, of course, I do hope that Solana will go up a lot more. We'll see. We'll see whether there's an elongated Bitcoin cycle this year. And hopefully, if that's the case, all of our altcoin bags will go up too. Okay, let's move on to news that moves Bitcoin price. Let me just flip to this chart with my bigger head because I don't have anything to show you guys. So, news that moves Bitcoin price section, Bitcoin ETF. I think a lot of optimism faded for Bitcoin. Essentially, there's too much outflow. 3 days, over 1 billion worth of outflow. So I think even in a lot of press, a lot of media, the coverage would be something like Bitcoin ETF optimism fades as 3-day outflow streak erases early months gains, right? So, and it's frightening a lot of retail investors, investors that are still growth hungry. they would think that, rather than investing into Bitcoin, let me just put it into growth equity instead, because at least the Nasdaq and S&P 500 are continued to form all-time high, right? So definitely all of this are stealing the mindshare away for Bitcoin. And of course, yesterday, I think 10 a.m., the Supreme Court decision for the Trump tariff got delayed. So, which is good, right? Which is good, because I was expecting the worst of situation for Bitcoin. So that's why in yesterday's video, I kind of gone into slightly more lengths to chat about the possibility of what could probably happen. So if you haven't watched that, just check that video out. So I think within that 45 minutes of announcement, Bitcoin pumped back about 2,100, which was quite positive at that time. I was thinking, maybe we'll go back up further. And of course, during that short period of time, 39 million worth of shorts got liquidated. So yeah, feel sorry for the bears. So I think in yesterday's case, I think there's still plenty of uncertainty. So that's why I do project that next week, I think this specific case from the Supreme Court has been delayed until next week. So in a way, next week we'll continue to be volatile. But of course, there are two risks that we need to, consider. Like one of the risks is definitely the refund. If the Supreme Court rule it's illegal, that means the government will have to refund of the money collected from the tariffs. So that will also mean the loss of projected 3 trillion deficits reduction over the next 10 years. So I somehow felt, that too much to consider, and it's not something that anyone dares to make that decision, because on one hand, it does seem it's unfair to take all of this money away from importers, exporters, from the companies, from the US or companies overseas, right? But at the same time, there'll also be the deficit consideration, which I think it's a very key consideration, knowing that the revenue can potentially be wiped off. So something definitely up for consideration, and which I strongly believe will have impact on the Bitcoin price in the short term. And another news, I think yesterday the jobs reports came out. US unemployment rate came at around 4.4%. Expectation is about 4.5%. Essentially means labor market in the US definitely improving, but still a little bit under the Fed's target. So yesterday I was actually hoping this will give, after the news, right, because we're off the target, there would be a pump for Bitcoin, but no pump at all, right? I guess the market is already pricing in there could probably be no rate cut, because it does seem the labor market are performing, right? So if we look at poly market, Fed's rates decision, right? I think yesterday before the announcement, we were still at no change, 92%. And then after the announcement, immediately it's gone up to about 97%, no change for January, right? So FYI, another FOMC meeting in end of Jan. So potentially, I think it's all priced in now, Bitcoin price. So no big pump, no huge drop. we may as well just continue to retrace between $89,000 to $93,000 worth of Bitcoin. Okay, other news. You know what? I don't have other more news. One more hopium news before I finish. Hopium news. Okay, this one. Bitfinex whales have started closing their BTC long positions. Last two times this happened were in October 2024 and April 2025, which led to a good rally. So let's take a look, right? So this is when Bitfinex whale, they close their position, then boom, that's the pump, right? So Bitfinex whale close off the position, boom, that's the pump. And this is where we're getting into again, right? It doesn't mean closing position means pump, right? But I think it's more about catching the sentiment of the market right now, because I think a lot of traders are getting too beaten up every time they do some long, and immediately they get wiped out by the market makers, right? So I think a lot of it's the sentiment for Bitcoin. It's really playing out right now. Every traders, investors are getting frightened out of it, right? And even new retail investors, they'll be like, oh no, I don't want to touch Bitcoin. This, it's a Ponzi, it's a too much risk, yada, yada, yada. So I would rather buy gold or silver or Johnson & Johnson's, take for instance, right? So potentially this is marking a potential bottom where fear peaks and reversals coming, right? So in Wyckoff's market cycle term, this resembles the spring phase, a final shakeout that tests support, clear speculative positions, and set up reaccumulation by smart money before an uptrend resumes. Okay, so the closing of longs removes the target of the market's back, reducing the risk of further leverage sell-off and paving the way for volatility to resolve upwards. I hope these are all hopium for everyone. Overall, for the 24 hours, I think not too big news. All news seems to be a nothing burger. So we are kind of retracing now between 90 to about 92,000. Let's hope it doesn't fall further. But having said that, there's always the other CME gap. But there are some hopium news coming next week. Next week, I think the Supreme Court's things comes in. I think there will be some clarity bill that gets discussed, right? Not sign off. I think that gets discussed. I think it gets voted, certain things. I think all of this will be exciting for the market. But I still feel because we are in a downwards movement trends, it may as well continue. I don't know. That's my thought. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching. Let me know if the mics improve, right? Because some of you guys are so good at leaving me comments. So I've definitely tried to max up the gain. Hopefully you will have a better experience. So let me know. I'll always try and improve my video, because I'm in this for the long, just as I'm in Bitcoin for the long game too. Okay, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.